Assalamu alaikum. My name is Fadwa Wazwaz. I'm about to wrap up the section or theme on boundaries and transgressors, and I'd like to take you actually to a scholarly commentary about some verses in the Quran, and maybe we can reflect on it together. Now, there's other obviously commentaries. I can't go through every single one because I'm not doing like kind of a dissertation. It's supposed to just be an attempt to get you to look at this particular verse or set of verses and to explore it further, look at other commentaries. But then, given what is taking place in Gaza, to reflect on it and try to gain insight of this important understanding. Let me just share the screen so that we could look at this together. Just going to expand this a little bit here. Okay. To give you a little understanding of where I'm at, I like this toward understanding the Quran. I look at it a lot. There's others, like I said, but I like this one too. And Ibn Kathir and some others that I look into when I try to like understand Quranic commentary. And boundaries and transgressors, people understand it as marketing or promoting the concept of revenge. Hold that thought, and I'll review it with these verses. Righteousness does not consist in turning your faces toward the east or the west. This is, by the way, chapter 2, the heifer. Baqarah, the cow. True righteousness consists in believing in Allah on the last day, the angels, the book, and the prophets, and in giving away one's property in love of Him to one's kinsmen, the orphans, the poor, the wayfarer, and to those who ask for help, and in freeing, again here, I mentioned this when I did the video on Khawla, in freeing the necks of slaves. You see that I said throughout the Quran, there is not just condemnation, but more even, it is, again, the freeing the necks of slaves, freeing the bondsman, free a slave. So you'll see the penalty for some things is free a slave. Some of us understand, as I said, that we no longer have slavery, and we can like not say like this is no longer universal, but the truth is it's our understanding of slavery is not according to what the Quran recognizes. So maybe like the person is not physically under, with a chain in your home, but there are slaves, either they're in prisons or, again, blockaded under complete total siege. All of this is a form of slavery. Someone has so much control over your food, water, everything, your movement. You're basically a slave. So because you depend and you rely on them to live or die. So if anyone has that type of relationship with you, that you rely on them, you have like total dependence on them to live or die, then they're acting like your master and you are their slave. Establishing prayer, dispensing the zakat. This is, again, obligatory. It's not like you're doing something good. It's a recognition, I have in a later chapter, that deals are made that rob people from their rights. And so not only do you free slaves, but also it encourages you to set things right. So zakat is really about, you have to obligatory on you to give a certain portion of your accumulated wealth back to certain like categories that it's prescribed to set the world right. True righteousness is attained by those who are faithful to their promise once they have made it, by those who remain steadfast in adversity, and affliction, and the time of battle between truth and falsehood, because there will always be battle between truth and falsehood. Such are the truthful ones, such are the God-fearing. So some commentary here, we could read it again together. Turning one's face toward the east or the west is mentioned here only by way of illustration. The actual purpose of the verse is to emphasize the observance of certain outward religious rites. I mentioned them, the performance of certain formal religious acts of conformism, and the manifestation of certain familiar forms of piety do not constitute that essential righteousness which alone carries weight with God and earns his recognition and approval. So I don't think it needs to be expanded. It's kind of very clear. But this is the verse that I'd like us to come to. Believers, retribution is prescribed for you. When people say eye for an eye means that it's promoting vengeance. The reality is, as human beings, we tend to, if you listen to what's going on in Gaza right now, we tend to promote and justify an eye for a village, an eye for a country, an eye for countries. Like after 9/11, it wasn't just one country that was bombed, an eye for countries. Even now, isn't one country that just facing genocide like Gaza. But you're also seeing bombing of Lebanon, Iran, Syria. So retribution, an eye for an eye, is really meant to kind of take the situation from going into genocide, going into an all-out holy war, going all out into major warfare, or, like nonstop back and forth killing, where we're seeing right now AI technology being used to justify the killing of everyone in the building, everyone in that refugee camp, everyone in Shifa Hospital, the whole destruction of the entire healthcare system. It's meant to say, an eye for an eye is meant to take the issue from going out of scope, out of bounds, and bringing it back where God validates your anger and says you have a right to retribution. Now, usually when people go into, like I said, genocide mode, or they go into all out of bounds, that's usually a telling sign that that's the transgressor. When someone goes out of bounds of the scope of, like, let's just say you and someone got into an argument or you got into a fight, and your retribution went way out of bounds, that's a sign you're a transgressor. So here it says, retribution is prescribed for you in case of killing. If a free man is guilty, then the free man. If a slave is guilty, then the slave. If a female is guilty, then the female. And I'll just read the commentary. If something of a murderer's guilt is remitted by his brother, thus, and this should be adhered to in fairness, and payment be made in goodly manner. This is an alleviation and a mercy from your Lord. And for him who commits excess, after that, there is a painful chastisement. Here's the focus. For him who commits excess, after that, there is a painful chastisement. Retribution, that is blood revenge, is based on the principle that a person has done what a person has done to others ought to be done to him. Because if someone is not penalized and they get away with it, 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 what happens? You're really nurturing a society where, first of all, you're nurturing one side, as I mentioned in the video with lessons from Khawla's story, is that what you're nurturing is narcissism. You're nurturing a heroic mindset. You're nurturing someone to be not just not accountable, but eventually they may end up engaging in genocide. And you're nurturing another person to continually be persecuted until you're basically forcing the only outlet is an attack like October 7th. So it's essential to understand that people have a right to retaliate, meaning that Palestinians have a right to retaliate. If there's one lesson we need to take out of what is taking place in Gaza right now, is that Palestinians have a right to retaliate. We cannot come out of this thinking that this is terrorism. You cannot tell people who are persecuted and oppressed, you have no right to retaliate. You're, first of all, in doing so, given a green light for you to keep oppressing and persecuting. And you're also going to actually create a worse situation like we are seeing right now, instead of promoting justice and promoting fairness and promoting stability in the region. Again, a lot of times I listen to what Israelis are saying and I just give it back to them. I say, can you swallow for yourself what you are selling to Palestinians? And I have not seen or any advice or any solution that they put on the table asking Palestinians to accept that if you push it back to them and say, can you accept this, that they are able to accept this. It's the same for the US or for France or others. Can you accept this? Can you, European countries, US, Canada, can you accept this solution that you are threatening Palestinians to accept? Because it's coming through threats, through brainwashing. It's through like domination. It's not through tyranny. It's not coming through negotiation, diplomacy, understanding, recognizing equal rights of each person's humanity. It's coming through subjugation. Retribution, that is blood revenge, is based on the principle that what a person has done to others ought to be done to him. This helps a person realize that the way you treat others, you're going to be treated. They're going to take that into account the next time they start massacring people, taking their land, oppressing them, attacking them. They're going to take that into account. This doesn't mean that the murderer should put to death in exactly the same manner as he killed, but that the murderer should be subjected to the same act. The murderer here we're talking about, not their mom, their dad, sister, their brother, their child. We're talking about the murderer. Same act, killing, as that to which he subjected his victim. How many Palestinians, like you watch every day, this Palestinian get killed, this Palestinian get shot, this Palestinian get killed, this Palestinian get shot, this child was killed, this child was shot, this one is tortured, this one is kicked. How many times have we been doing that day in and day out? And you're reading Al-Fatiha for them. You say, read Al-Fatiha, read Al-Fatiha. You just watch it. So that this is not seen as, some individuals like to hide behind anti-Semitism and they like to hide behind the Holocaust. So let's look at it in historical. In pre-Islamic Arabia, people tried to take blood revenge upon the murderer's family and tribe. Just like we're seeing right now. If somebody did something wrong, it was not sufficient that they hit the murderer, but they went after the family and the entire tribe. This is pre-Islamic Arabia. So again, when this verse came, it came to stop what we're witnessing right now, what Israel is doing. It came to stop that. It came to say, nope, you cannot go out of the scope. You cannot go out of that scope. You have to go exactly to those very same individuals and bring them before a court of law and then apply justice towards them. But you cannot go out of scope. This is what an eye for an eye means. The retaliation corresponded to the value placed on the blood of the victim. Their desire for revenge was not quenched merely by putting the murderer to death. They preferred to put to death tens and even hundreds of people to avenge the one life they had lost. It's not that's why I keep saying it's not a Jewish thing. This is just part of the human condition. This is how some people respond when, like, you know, they feel like they're transgressed upon. Now, if they're noble and they're always like living with this mode of eye for an eye, and they take into consideration if they harm others, they usually do not act this way. But usually it's people who are transgressors. Like they get away, and then somebody like retaliates, and they go and they want to like kill everything in sight. But their desire for revenge was not quenched merely by putting the murderer to death. They preferred to put to death tens and even hundreds of people to avenge for the one life they had lost. If a respected member of their tribe was killed by an ordinary member of another, it was not deemed enough to put to death the actual murderer. For example, like a head of state or something, was not sufficient that they just go ahead and take the murderer, and kind of like we did with Timothy McVeigh. We understand these issues, but our racism and our fascism kicks in. Arrogance, egoism, it kicks in. So it was not sufficient that that actual person who committed this act, an eye for an eye, be put to death. No, they insisted that they preferred to kill a man of the murderer's tribe equal in standing to the victim. So they wanted to make sure that they killed like somebody who's innocent, but they had to go ahead and kill somebody who was like a leader, maybe a respectable leader. They had to put him to death and several members of the murderer's tribe. So there was like this, an example of that would be, let's just say, some individuals came and they're like ordinary Muslims, and they went ahead and they did like an attack, a terrorist attack. It's not enough to go and find these people and try them in court. They have to go and bomb, you know, several countries and many leaders just to kind of quench their revenge. Now let's try to see where eye for an eye is. If the victim was a man of humble standing from another tribe, and the murderer from their tribe happened to be a man of high standing, like a leader, they were unwilling to permit the execution of the murderer. I say it again. If it's somebody like an ordinary Palestinian, they got killed, and the killer was someone of high standing in Israeli society. Or it could even be, in this situation, it could be just a normal person. They were unwilling to permit the execution of the murder. So it basically, if somebody was a nobody and they got killed, it was unlikely for justice to prevail. So you have to deal with it. There was the privileged, the ruling class. And if these people were like, you know, ever faced any retaliation or retribution, they call it now terrorism, any retribution or retaliation, the whole world had to face hell. But if it's just a commoner, an ordinary person, unknown, then nobody really cared. There was literally like no justice. The attitude is not continued to the ignorance of that gone by age. So again, as much as we'd like to think that we advanced and there's no slavery anymore, the reality is we are seeing these situations now. Even today, nations are supposedly the most civilized, will proclaim officially and quite brazenly that if one of their citizens is killed, they'll execute scores of the killer's compatriots, excuse me. In addition, we often hear that to avenge the murder of one person, a large number of hostages belonging to a subject nation have been shot dead. Witnessing this or not? One of the civilized nations of the present century subjected the whole Egyptian nation to blood revenge because one of their officials, Sir Lee Stack, was killed by an Egyptian. The courts of justice of these so-called civilized nations have been known to refrain from passing the death sentence on convicted homicides when they happen to be members of the ruling nation, while their victims belong to the subject nation. Are we witnessing this or not? It is inequities such as these that God seeks to end by means of the directive contained in this verse. That is the point of an eye for an eye, to end genocide, to prevent genocide, to prevent these uncontrollable wars by individuals who tend to have big bombs, but they are transgressors. Transgressors with big bombs, advanced weaponry, but they are transgressors, violating law, violating reason. What God says here is that the killer ought to be put to death, irrespective of his status and that of the victim. And we're witnessing this now. You know, an Israeli does this, they get away. An Israeli soldier, get away. Israeli settler, get away. Israeli leader, get away. But then if Palestinian responds, then all of a sudden every single Palestinian has to face punishment. The very use of the word brother in this context suggests, this is just some commentary on the verse, that as a general rule, one ought to incline towards leniency. Despite the bitterness felt towards someone who has shed the blood of, say, one's father, the murderer is still one's brother by virtue of being a member of the human family. Again, try to understand what the aim of an eye for an eye. It's to end bloodshed, to end genocide, to prevent bloodshed, to prevent out of scope, out of, reason, genocide. Hence, if one has been wronged, hence, if one who has been wronged can overcome the vengeful spirit, this is not obligatory because we all are human beings. But if you can advance to that higher state of being and overcome that vengeful spirit, because we all have a vengeful spirit. You cannot pretend like, oh, you're preaching all this coolness and niceties, and then when somebody is hit from like an American, then all of a sudden everybody has to pay hell. But then when it comes from, extremists that you're exporting to other lands and they're creating violence and instability, then you're just saying, oh, deal with it. Hence, if one has been wrong, can overcome the vengeful spirit aroused by his erring brother's deed, this attitude of forgiveness will be worthy of his humanity. So if somebody wants to rise to that state, it has to be, again, who? The victim. No one can obligate the victim, but the victim can choose to rise to that state. This verse also makes it clear that according to Islamic penal law, the question of homicide can be settled by the mutual consent of two parties. Again, the victim and the offender. As the victim usually needs a supporting system because that's how they became a victim. It is a prerogative of the heirs of the victim to forgive the murderer. And if it is exercised, not even a judge has the power to assist on carrying out the death sentence. So if somebody, again, they're just aimed at that victim, they did not aim at the society itself. The victim's family can forgive them. And there is no need for, again, an eye for an eye, because they have risen to a state where they could say, I forgive. But who does the forgiving? The victim out of choice. They cannot be obligated. You can't be punching Palestinians, killing Palestinians, massacring Palestinians, just taking their home and then compelling them and threatening them to forgive. That's abuse. Emotional abuse, mental abuse, spiritual abuse, tyranny. It is not forgiveness. In such a case, however, as the following verse mentions, the murderers will be paid blood money. So it can't also be, because sometimes there are people who are vulnerable and gullible, and people will like use niceties to bribe them to forgive. And I've seen that. I know of cases where people were like talked into like forgiving as a way of, because they were kind of gullible, the victims, and naive. But again, they have to have a support system, because there needs to be still penalty. If the one wants to forgive and say, I don't want that murderer to be killed, there still has to be a penalty, and that's blood money. The term ma'ruf occurs quite frequently in the Quran. It refers to the conduct which is reckoned fair and equitable by the generality of disinterested people. The generally accepted usages and customs of life are called urf and ma'ruf in Islamic terminology, and they are considered valid in all those matters not specifically regulated by the Sharia. So like cultural practices. Excess might consist of trying to avenge the blood of the murdered man, even after his heirs have settled the matter and received blood money, or of efforts on the part of the murderer to delay the payment of blood money, thus repaying the heirs of the victim in gratitude for their kindness and goodwill. So again, it's about boundaries and transgressions. If you come to an agreement, then you shouldn't be turning around, figuring out ways to also violate that agreement. This is about, again, when somebody is kind of kind, they're showing kindness to you and goodwill to you, you turn around and you also respond with revenge. So it's essential, again, to reflect on the importance of what it means an eye for an eye. You're not promoting here revenge. You're promoting healthy boundaries. And one party cannot be getting away, while another party is just getting punched. You know, and then an example of that would be like someone getting raped, and then they hit back their rapist. And you're telling the person now to go and kill the person who's being raped. Why they hit back the rapist? It does, it does not compute. The current discourse, to defend Israel just does not make sense. It's like, again, it's like listening to people in the insane asylum trying to like sell you insanity as civilized realities. It's a totally divorced from sane individuals and how they understand healthy boundaries. People of understanding, again, notice how it's referenced, because there's people of understanding and there's people of insanity. That there is life for you in retribution. This is not, again, promoting revenge, but preventing bloodshed and preventing genocide. That you may guard yourselves against violating the law. Boundaries. There's a law that you have to be bound by that protects you from them and them from you. This refutes another notion of ignorance, a notion ingrained in the minds of many people, both past and present. On the one hand, there are some people who, entrenched in ignorance, I would say insanity also, tend to exceed the limits of moderation and revenge, like we're witnessing right now in Gaza. I wouldn't call it ignorance, I would call it insanity, because they went through the Holocaust. They understand the lessons of the Holocaust. They know how dehumanization led to the Holocaust. They understand quite a lot of it. But sometimes where we go astray is we assume we're immune from being the very same persecutors. We're immune from being Hitler, we're immune from being Nazis, we're immune from, being the transgressors. Here, like I said, I gave an example, or this scholar gave an example, in pre-Islamic Arabia. So it's not a Jewish thing. It's not a Nazi thing. It's not just a white thing. It's all about, again, a thing of where one individual, set of humans, privileged, tend to get away, avoid accountability. That is the problem. We're trying to like shove that aside, and we're getting into, supremacy back and forth discussion. Who's the better race? Who's the better faith? My God is better than your God. My faith is better than your, kind of like nonsense. Nonsense. As I said here, at the other end of the spectrum stand those who are opposed in principle to the concept of executing a murderer, which is not their choice. This is the choice of the victim to forgive or not. It's not the choice of somebody who was not impacted by that murder. And a lot of times people rob the oppressed and the persecuted from their right to retaliate. And that is not their right. So there's one lesson we need to get out from the situation in Gaza is Palestinians have a right to retaliate. Oppressed people have a right to retaliate. Persecuted people have a right to retaliate. That's not terrorism. We have to put it in our psyche, in our mind, in our conscience. That is not terrorism. God gave people who are oppressed, who are abused, the right to retaliate. God just said, do not go out of bounds in that retaliation. Those who are opposed in principle to the concept of executing murder, they have conducted such intense worldwide propaganda against the death penalty that has become abhorrent to many people. And in fact, the impact of this propaganda has been so great that in many countries, the death penalty has been abolished altogether. The Quran, however, addresses itself on this question to the wise and intelligent people and cautions them against such immoderate leniency by proclaiming that the survival of human society rests on the application of the death penalty for homicide. Society which holds inviolable the lives of those who disregard the sanctity of human life is in fact rearing snakes and serpents. And say that again. Society which holds inviolable the lives of those who disregard the sanctity of human life is in fact rearing snakes and serpents. To save the life of one murderer is to risk the lives of many innocent human beings. Now, obviously, the justice system is skewed sometimes against the oppressed, and I addressed that in the beginning. But we need to fix the justice system. And we need to make sure we shoot checks and balances. And we need to ensure that the victim who's been impacted and affected by this murder, they have the right to forgive or to demand that that person who murdered be executed, not the entire village, but that person who murdered their loved one be executed. They have to come under their mercy, because that's how it will be on the day of judgment. The oppressed will be under the mercy of those they oppressed. And the oppressed will be given a choice to forgive them or to demand retribution. So I'd like us to reflect on this. And I won't go, this is unrelated to what I was discussing, but to reflect on these verses and to go into other scholarly commentaries. But again, my hope out of this, not that we promote revenge, but we promote boundaries, and we identify transgressors, and we mobilize to push transgressors within their boundaries. And we recognize the difference between terrorism and between retribution and retaliation, which an oppressed, a persecuted people have a right to. They have a right to retribution. They have a right to retaliation. It's essential that we understand that so we do not keep rearing or nurturing snakes, serpents, or genociders, abusers, individuals who are just love to steal land, are considering throwing like nuclear bombs to solve problems, harming people. It's essential that we do not rear such individuals, because that's what we're doing when we let go. When somebody says, I was persecuted, I was oppressed, here's the evidence, and a court of law decides that, yes, they are persecuted, they are oppressed, and you want to sort of like avoid taking action, avoid bringing the individuals who persecuted them to justice. So they want to say, how can we prevent October 7th from happening again? Bring every Israeli that executed, killed a Palestinian, apply the death penalty. As you executed people in Gaza, every single one of those individuals that executed innocent people should have the death penalty applied to them. Every single one. You can call them soldiers. I don't call them, I call them criminals. And why rest just on this time in Gaza? We need to go back to all the other times as well. All the different massacres that took place. Very hard to see for Palestinians to see these people roaming around internationally, nationally, even at times coming on stage, speaking about, all of these great things, and yet they are supporting a genocide when it's taking place. These individuals have executed, even by their own admission, confessions, they executed Palestinians. They need to be brought before justice and given the death penalty. This is how we prevent another October 7th. When the Israelis who committed murder against Palestinians are put to justice, are brought before justice, and are given the death penalty. If you seriously want to end bloodshed, end genocide, prevent another October 7th, the solution is right there before you. There is retribution, there is life in retribution. So if you are genuinely serious, you want to prevent another October 7th, the solution is right here. But if you don't want, then you're going to continually be rearing a society of snakes and serpents, oppressors, abusers, insane individuals, that eventually you will face your downfall. Like Pharaoh faced his downfall, like Hitler faced his downfall. Societies like that do not last forever. So I leave you with that to reflect on. And we need to be bold, and we need to be honest with each other if we genuinely want to end this bloodshed or not. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.